What is going on, guys? Vanity here, back with volume 11 of the In the Style of series, this time covering the highly requested Sam Gellaitry. This is the composition I'm going to be taking you through today. What you're seeing on your screen is a message map for this tutorial. This is going to be the new feature in the series, giving yourself a clear and organised indication of the topics I will be covering. Starting with About the Artist, which will be around 3 minutes long, the latter and more important segments will be around 8 minutes in length, respectively. The times for each section are listed and linked in the description, so if you wish to skip the About the Artist segment, for example, you can, without missing any of the important information. About the Artist, background and musical projects. Sam Gellaitry is a 19-year-old producer from Stirling, Scotland. He began working on creating tracks when he was 12 years old after hearing his brother and friend creating sounds using Acid Pro. Sam continued to experiment with making music on his computer at his home in Stirling and decided to leave school at 16 in order to focus more intently on it. The decision was supported by his family, who recognised his talent, enthusiasm and commitment to composing his own music. After this, he attended a music course at a local college for a short time and gained more insight into the music business and how it works. Sam has been working exclusively on creating music and playing shows ever since he left education. He has toured widely throughout Europe and in the US and Canada. Sam's first, or at least his most popular first EP, was released in February of 2015 with Soulection. This was titled Short Stories. The track Temple from this EP was actually the first track of his I had ever heard and was blown away by it. He went on to release the popular Escapism 1 in November of 2015 and his second Escapism EP on XL Records in 2016. It was very well received with over 4 million streams on Spotify across both EPs. Style and production. I'm sure everyone watching this already knows Sam Gellaitry's sound, but there may be a couple of aspects you've looked over. The main characteristics I'm hearing over and over again in his records are, of course, that super loud 808, the vocal synths or samples, and just the general mix of different synth layers. Upon creating something similar, I found that the hardest part was definitely the mix of the synths, finding perhaps 3 different instruments and layering them together like pieces of a puzzle. The actual sounds contained in each are fairly simple, but it's the combination of everything together that is the difficult part. Equipment. I'm unable to find much information on what equipment, both in software and hardware, Sam Gellaitry uses. I do know FL Studio is his DAW of choice on Windows, combined with Massive from Native Instruments. From his Twitter videos, it looks like he uses most of the FL stock plugins for mixing and processing, similar to Esther in my last tutorial using Ableton stock devices. This just further emphasises that you don't need fancy software or hardware to produce great sounding music. Something that I've been failing to mention in my last few tutorials are what you should be looking out for when selecting drums, as this dictates everything that follows. Here's what the drums sound like on their own. Sam's kick drums usually sit just on top of his 808, just highlighting the start of the sample. The 808 is of course the main focus. The kick really isn't doing all that much, but it is still the foundation of any good drum groove. The way I've approached it in this composition is by splitting the kick drum into 2. One for the low end thud sitting just above the 808 bass, and one for providing some mid or high end detail that helps to cut through the mix. I find that the combination of these two are perfect. Splitting it onto 2 channels allows you to easily control the volume for both samples, as, generally speaking, you want the higher kick a little quieter than its low end counterpart. This is how both kick drums sound on their own. This is the low end kick. and the more mid-range sounding kick drum. I've obviously got everything under 100Hz rolled out of this one, just so it doesn't interfere with the low end kick. The processing on the kick is kind of becoming a standard practice now, but I would like to emphasise that picking the samples in the first place is where the magic is. Applying effects can only ever enhance the sound you've already chosen. I've just gone for my standard EQ configuration and my bus compressor. If you're not a regular viewer of mine, I went over the premises behind this setup in my last video on Esther. Explaining everything in every tutorial would take up way too much time, our most precious resource. Moving on to the snare, which sounds like this, soloed. The snare is comprised of two layers. A typical tight trap snare, which sounds like this. And a regular snare hit mixed with a clap, which sounds like this. As with the kick drum, I've split it onto two layers just to make it easier for myself, giving me great control over the finished product. Sam snares are definitely a mix of a clap and a snare. The snare provides the punch, the crack if you will, and the clap is there more for tone and timbre. It adds interest and kind of softens the blow of the sharp snare hit. Not much however, it just makes the snare less repetitive and allows it to cut through Sam's busy mixes. The processing on the snare bus is exactly the same as on the kicks, only I'm cutting off everything under 100Hz this time, as I do not want anything this low present in my snare drum. The percussion is just a bongo loop that I've chopped up and rearranged, which sounds like this. There's also a tambourine hit mixed in there with it too. The processing is exactly the same as on the snare, so I won't speak on that again. Although I would like to emphasise the importance of bussing each group of your sounds together if you want a coherent mix. Worth mentioning, I have also sidechained the percussion to the kick and the snare. Now I do this in nearly every tutorial just to add an extra layer of bounce to the beat. I really like my kick and snare to be super clean and have nothing obstructing them in a mix. Try it out for yourself. Sidechain your percussion to your kick and your snare drum and see if you like how it sounds. All of the sounds you just heard, as well as a couple hundred more, are from my Sam Gellaitry sample pack, which also includes 40 free serum presets, of which you'll hear a few from the pack a little later on in this video. There is a link to the sample pack in the top of the description below. You can also see that the artwork is taking inspiration from Sam's Escapism 2 EP. I felt this was only appropriate as we are on volume 11 of this series already. Let's move on to the bass. One of the most notorious sounds Sam Gellaitry is known for is of course his 808 bass. I do believe that the key is in choosing the right 808 bass tone to start with, and then obviously applying the correct processing chain to follow that up with. This is how the 808 sounds soloed. Picking the right sound is definitely the first step. I'd say that the second for achieving a Sam Gellaitry style 808 is distorting the mid harmonics, just ever so slightly to give it some tone in the 200 to 1k area. Now I am using my standard bass processing chain, but I have made some slight adjustments on the Camel Crusher in order to get a little more distortion out of the sound. This is how the settings are looking. You can see here that I've added just a slight bit more tube distortion and opened up the cutoff frequency to around the 12 o'clock position, just to let some more of those mid-range frequencies through. The next plugin, Waves Max Bass, is providing a tone above my bassline, allowing small speaker cones to be able to pick up the tune even though the impact will not be there. This stops the bass from getting lost on devices such as Apple earbuds, TV and laptop speakers, etc. The bassline is such a critical element in this style of music, and most people consume music through some bad sounding mediums, and that's putting it nicely. You do not want all of them hours hours tweaking that 808 bassline melody to go unnoticed, so make sure you have a play with this plugin. Sam's 808s do sound to me a little overcompressed, which isn't always a bad thing. I've replicated that here, taking off around 8 decibels, which is overcompressing for me. The last plugin here is just sidechaining the kick to this 808 ever so slightly, which just gives the kick drum a bit of breathing room as this monster 808 would eat it up otherwise. Moving on from the bass, let's get into the synthesis. This is how the two synths sound soloed. When I was first listening to Sam Gellaitry's records, they sounded super difficult to recreate, but when you actually break down each element and look at the track from above as it were, you can see that it's not all that complicated when you can see the full thing together. It's like trying to put together a puzzle without that picture to show you what it should look like upon completion. That's not to take any credit away from Sam. Clearly he's a fantastic producer. I'm just wanting to emphasise that things are not as complicated as they first seem when you really study and dissect something. Do I think this composition sounds like Sam himself made it? No, I don't. And I don't think it should. If it did, Sam wouldn't be as special as he is, as he'd be easy to emulate. You can get close, but only Sam Gellaitry can do Sam Gellaitry, and that's the way it should always be. The one thing I really did pick up on was his ability to stack synths, to layer sounds together that creates this majestic overlay of synthesis which is synonymous with the notes in the melody. They are just as important as one another, they quite literally harmonise together into what you're hearing. If I zoom in on them here, you can see that the notes complement each other. The pluck plays where the chords don't. It relates back to what I was describing in my last video on layering and spacing out your chords. You have to create room for each sound, not just in the frequency spectrum, but also in the melody. The sounds I've used are so basic it might make you laugh. The first chord sound is a pad that I've made on Serum. It's one of the Serum presets from the sample pack. The movement you're hearing comes from assigning an LFO, you can see it here, LFO 1, to the cutoff from a low pass filter which is up here. Without the LFO, the sound is pretty boring. It's really what adds in the interest to the synth. If you're struggling with LFOs, the same guys who actually make Serum have a plugin called LFO Tool that is essentially, as the name suggests, a standalone LFO plugin. I don't own it, but I do know that it contains a few presets that should help to get you started. I would recommend using either Serum or Massive, as the LFOs on both plugins are very detailed and give you a ton of options for creating interesting movements in your sounds. Guys, also, if you do not have Serum yet, you really need to get it, especially if you're after something similar to Sam's sound, which if you're watching this, I'm presuming you all are. You can actually pay $10 a month for it through Splice, which is actually what I'm doing. That's why it says Plan Active under the logo on my copy of the plugin, just in case you're wondering. It's listed and linked in the description, and no, it's not an affiliate link. The second synth sound is just a simple pluck that I've again made in Serum and again is included in the sample pack. I've also added in this washout effect rack, which you can see here. It's essentially been automated to turn itself on and off for every note of the pluck sound. But because this is on the bus for both synths, it is also actually affecting the main lead sound. Now this is something I would encourage and haven't actually spoken on before. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of these racks that other Ableton users have created for you to download and use in your own productions. I'll provide some links in the description for you guys. Synth loops, as you all know, can get very repetitive pretty fast, as usually it's just a 16-bar loop being repeated for 3 to 4 minutes. But adding in some automation of various effects throughout the track makes it much more interesting and less predictable, so please keep that in mind. Both of these sounds have on the standard processing chain comprised of an EQ and compressor. I have got something a little interesting that I haven't spoke about yet. Next time you listen to a Sam Gellaitry record, notice how big and wide the synths sound. A lot of people have trouble with this as they presume it's from panning, and in most instances it's not. It's from using the hat effect, which basically delays the sound so slightly that your brain perceives the delayed sound and the dried sound as one. Your brain can't notice anything up to around 45 milliseconds, I think it is, as a delayed sound, which allows us to get super wide sounding synths. I've got the delays in a neat rack here, which is also in the sample pack. I've also provided a free download again in the description. No email, no ads, just a simple Dropbox link. Worth mentioning too, both of these synth sounds are being sidechained to the kick and the snare. I've pretty much sidechained the kick and the snare to everything in this track, and that is to try and create that Sam Gellaitry bounce effect that is one of the other main elements of his sound. I'm starting a new little section after the next mastering segment, which I've called takeaways, and are just 3 things that I'd like you to take away from this tutorial, if nothing else, as we do cover a lot of ground in these 20 minutes or so. My mastering chain on this record looks like this. I'll just go through each plugin one by one. The BX Control from Brainworks. I'm using this to make everything under 250Hz mono and boost the stereo wideness of the track by 25%. All of your low frequencies should be in mono, including, and sometimes forgotten about, the bottom end of your snare drums. Rather than applying processing to each sound individually, it makes more sense to me to apply it once on the master bus. The next plugin is from Slate Digital, and it's just given the track a slight tape sound, only very slightly however, and this is just for my own personal preference. I've also got 2 PSP old-timer plugins, one compressing the middle and one compressing the sides. I've said this in every tutorial and I will keep saying it, they just work some magic on records. They always, without fail, sweeten up the high end of the track. Now, I've used this standard mastering chain on every one of my tutorials. This isn't necessarily specific to Sam Gellaitry's sound, it's just a really great mastering chain. The L2 on the end here is my go-to limiter. I'm leaving 0.2 decibels for any intersample peaks that may occur on the listener's end. I will then adjust this threshold until my track is sitting around -10 RMS or until I'm taking off a maximum of 3 decibels. If I need to take off more than 3 decibels to reach my desired RMS level, I'll go back to the track and usually it will be compression and volume adjustments I'll have to make until it's right. Alright, so my key takeaways for this tutorial are: number 1, applying some mid-range distortion to your 808s. This can only ever really enhance what is already there. You could even split the 808 into 2, everything below 100Hz for one, and the second one could be everything above, allowing you more control over the mid-range harmonics of your bassline. Number 2, the key to Sam's sound really is layering synths in the right way, both with finding room in the frequency spectrum, but perhaps and more importantly, finding space in the melody. Having a few different synths that complement each other, both in tone and spacing, is really the key. Number 3, sound selection is the key. Pick the right sounds to begin with and you'll have less problems moving forward. Set yourself up to succeed. That's all I've got for you today, guys. I hope this gave you a helpful insight into Sam Gellaitry's sound. If you did enjoy this video, I would highly appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of these tutorials. I don't ask you guys to like the video for the sake of it, it does help the video rank higher, allowing me to reach a wider audience. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. I'm out. Peace.